no amount of meditating or breathing or upright positioning is going to create enough change in your scenario to make you feel like that was so great. Like, great birth can be great. We're actually hormonally wired to feel bliss and feel great and be positively transformed by birth.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. You guys, today's episode is absolutely going to change your life. And here's the deal. I know that you know about the cascade of interventions, the idea that the more we intervene, the more interventions you need. So let's say you go in for an induction that you didn't need, and you start with cervical ripener, but it doesn't actually ripen your cervix. So then you get more cervical ripener, and then you, of course, need cervical exams to check whether the ripener is working or not. And then that doesn't work. So then we decide to break your waters, and that doesn't work. So then we decide to give you Pitocin. Meanwhile, you're still getting routine cervical exams every few hours, and then the Pitocin makes your contractions so much stronger that you end up getting an epidural, and then the epidural is so heavy that you're not able to get up into upright positions. And so there is the cascade of interventions. You can see how when we intervene, oftentimes we actually need more interventions because either the intervention that we previously didn't work, or it caused complications. So this is not a new idea. I talk about it all the time, and I know you hear about it online, but what I wanted you to hear was the inside workings of the hospital system. I want to help you understand that knowing your options and how you feel about those options and knowing the stages of labor is not enough to actually help you have a good and positive birth. You also have to understand how the hospital system itself works, because if you go to have your baby, which most people will, at a hospital, then you need to be prepared in navigating that hospital system. What are you allowed and not allowed to say no to? What kind of procedures can you expect to be offered to you? How do you ask for alternatives? How do you say no? How do you decline things? How do you request things that may not be being offered to you? Well, today I am overjoyed and honored to be being joined by Dr. Melanie Jackson, aka Melanie the Midwife on all social platforms, or you may know her as just Mel. She is a midwife, and she loves to help women around the world have a better understanding and apply research to motherhood and pregnancy and birth. She also is the host of the Great Birth Rebellion podcast, supporting and mentoring midwives and moms all over the world. We call her doctor, even though she is a midwife, because she actually has a PhD in midwifery. And so I thought, who better to have on the show to help us understand what does the inside of the hospital system look like, and how can we as consumers navigate that hospital system to still achieve the births that we want, often low intervention, low risk, autonomous, respected, trauma-free births. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can take radical responsibility in the decisions that are made in your labor, how the data that we have often lags a decade or two behind actual practice that's implemented in the hospital, and how can you decipher good data from, let's call it, poor data, because I don't know that any data is bad because it always gives us answers, but maybe poorly constructed scientific studies. Also, in this episode, Mel and I are going to break down the difference between the Australian healthcare system and the U.S. healthcare system. However, you're going to learn that our C section rates in both of those countries are relatively the same, even though one is a for profit system and one is a publicly funded system. If you're stuck scratching your head, don't worry. So was I, and you know I asked Mel all about it. And before we dive in, I wanted to tell you about two resources that are going to help you after you listen to this episode. Number one, my scripts for advocacy. I have a free download that is jam-packed with literal scripts, what your doctor is likely to say, and then options of what you can say in order to navigate different conversations so that you can walk right into your doctor's office feeling confident so that you can advocate for yourself. You can download that at thebirthlounge.com/scripts-for-advocacy, or even easier, we have linked them below in the show notes for you. One clickable link and it will be sent directly to your inbox. Next, I know that we do a lot of talking in this episode about consolidating research and how daunting it can be to actually go through all of that research. And if reading research isn't part of your skills or your background or anything that you've ever done before, it can feel super confusing. Lucky for you, I have compiled all of the data for all of your questions inside the Birth Lounge app, which is available for iOS, iPhones, and Google devices. The app is your handy dandy go-to for all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, but that's evidence-based and data-driven. I'm not going to be telling you that your baby is the size of a pecan or a cherry or a watermelon each week, but I will tell you exactly what you're growing. For example, this week you're growing eyelashes, toenails, and eyebrows. Or I may tell you your baby is growing their gastric system, and these are the symptoms that you may be experiencing. If you download the Birth Lounge app, then you also get access to all of our free downloads, including those scripts for advocacy that I was just talking about. Visit your respective app store to download the Birth Lounge app right now. So grab your pen and paper and buckle up, because this has got to be one of my all-time favorite episodes I have ever done on the podcast. Without further ado, Dr. Mel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. This is such a huge honor to have you here. And you have been on my long list of people that I've wanted to have on the show for a really long time. And I finally got up the courage to ask you. And I was just so honored at your generosity with your time and how quickly you signed up. And I just feel very lucky and grateful that you are here. So thanks for being here. I think a lot of our listeners already know you, and I just shared a little bit more about who you are with them. And so I kind of want to dive right into the nitty-gritty. But before we do that, you got to tell us about pregnancy, which you have crocheted this naked belly and you wear it around online. And do you know, I just died when I saw that. I was like, that is the funniest thing I have ever seen. Tell us about pregnancy and what inspired her to be born and how you use her.
Yes, so pregnancy, for anybody who hasn't seen her, I pioneered her. She's a one of a kind, and you'll see her on my social media. Melanie the Midwife on Instagram is probably the best place to get a taste of pregnancy. But she is a fully crocheted pregnant belly, body, boobs, vulva, anus, everything. And I wear her as a bodysuit. Partly what inspired me was a lot of my work is about educating women about pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And I'm a midwife myself, but I'm done having my babies, and mine are 8 and 12. And so they were born well before this whole idea of social media content ever came into my work. So I've just got no way of embodying what pregnancy is like. And so pregnancy is like my alter ego, and I put her on for educational purposes, but she's turned into a little bit of a celebrity herself. So she's been invited to conferences and all
Oh
kinds of
my gosh.
things. I know. They invite me to speak, for example, and they're like, and on the side, they're like, and do you think you could bring pregnancy? So she's got a celebrity following all of her own. Yeah, so she's pretty dramatic. And yeah, as you will see, if you see videos of pregnancy, she's got a full anatomically correct vulva and a characteristic high kick, which reveals it full spectrum. That's pregnancy. So she's exclusively online for your viewing pleasure.
I love it. I love pregnancy. And anytime she makes an appearance, I'm like, yes, I love seeing her so much. And I think there's something so inspiring about bringing the casualness to women's bodies. They can feel so taboo. It can feel so hush. Oh, we have a vulva. Oh, the vagina. And it's no, we have a vulva. We have a vagina. Let's talk about it, especially in pregnancy and birth. Those things are A, how we got in this situation. B, they are changing throughout this entire journey. And a lot of that can feel again very secretive and taboo. And so I for one really respect and appreciate you just bringing this very casual energy and air about this is your body, let's talk about it, ask the questions that you need to ask, and I'm going to show you what it looks like and the parts that are changing and the parts that you may need to talk to your doctor about. And I want you to feel inspired and informed and confident in doing that.
Yeah, and I think bringing comedy to pregnant things that happen to women in pregnancy and birth, sometimes they're not funny at all. Like, women are having a really hard time, or they have a really rough birth, or maybe their outcomes were really upsetting.
Hmm.
And I just think using comedy and this kind of thing to lighten up the message, it's still addressing serious things, but in a way that's really palatable and a bit easier. Yeah, it's she's all about education, breaking through those taboo barriers. And actually, I think pregnancy is just me completely unhinged, like without any inhibitions, which is great. I just get to be completely myself instead of professional Dr. Melanie Jackson. It's like, this is where it's all at with pregnancy. She's my permission to just unapologetically be myself. Yeah.
You can say that wasn't me. What are you talking about? That was pregnancy. I
That's
can't
what I do.
control her.
That's what I do. I'm like, that's pregnancy. She can't be put in a box. She's audacious. I'm sorry, I can't.
What am I
Yeah.
supposed to do with her? She's just there. I love that. Hey, I wouldn't know what that not unhinged life is. Even in my professional state, I'm still unhinged and I'm like, I'm saying it because it's got to be said. I just have to put it out there. So that's awesome. I love that. And I love the suit that you've made. And yeah, I agree. She has a little bit of her own following out there. She is a little bit of a celebrity. I love it. Okay, so one thing that you and I have very much in common is obviously we love childbirth and we love educating people on that. But I find that in a lot of childbirth eds, what is missing is helping people navigate the system. And
Mm.
that's a very crucial part to childbirth education. It is very important to understand your options, and it's really important to know how you feel about those options, and it's really important to know the stages of labor. But none of that will matter if when you walk into the hospital, you are railroaded by the system and you aren't able to navigate the things that are happening to you, said to you, offered to you because you don't understand how the system works. And when I first began childbirth education, I incorporated that into my education, and I faced a lot of pushback here in the US. And you're in Australia, so I'd
Mhm.
like to talk about two different pieces to this. I think it's really interesting the differences between the Australian system and the US system. So maybe we could start there, but then I'd also love to know your tips on helping women navigate the hospital system because It is equally important as knowing your options and how you feel about those options and knowing, what's going to come your way in labor. Because if you don't know how to navigate the system, it is very possible that you're going to just experience things that you were unprepared for. And I want to prevent that for people. I know that preparation in what the hospital system expects as the normal or expects you to do as a laboring person will help you have a better birth because you will be prepared to accept the things that are good for you or aligned with you, decline the things that aren't good for you and aren't aligned for you, or delay the things that you're not quite sure on and you'd like to take some time to think about it before you make your decision.
Yeah, I think wherever you are in the world, the maternity care system is fundamentally set up in a really similar way, even though things are different and definitely different here in Australia to the US. You have to remember that when birth moved from predominantly being at home, so prior to the 1900s, women were giving birth at home. There wasn't such thing as maternity care or birthing in hospitals. So giving birth in hospital is at best 100-ish, 120 years old is how long women have been going to hospital to have their babies. And when you industrialize something like birth and move it into a hospital, the organization of that process is fundamentally the same the world over. So, what women need to understand wherever they are in the world is that the hospital system is just that. If you think about it, and I'm not saying this to be derogatory, but if you think about it a little bit like a factory, and the women and the babies are the product. That's what travels along the conveyor belt. That's what, everyone's working on. It's the woman and the baby. That's what they're there for. But a factory has to work in a systematic way. There has to be clear processes, clear conveyor belts, clear purposes and functions for the staff that are there. And there's a set of rules. And that's maybe what we call the policy and the guidelines. And the people who are working in the factory, the maternity care workers, again, this might sound a bit crass. I'm just using it as a visual example of how the sort of the behind the scenes workings of a hospital. This is what you're coming into. You don't know it, and potentially the staff don't even realize that women's maternity care has been systematized in such a way that to want something that's different to what the usual conveyor belt is, that is a challenge to the whole system. It's a challenge to the entire factory. There's no clear pathway within the maternity care system for individualized care. Just if you enter into a factory, there might be 4 or 5 conveyor belts. And usually, how a hospital works is they will elect your conveyor belt, the belt that you are going on, to move through their system based on your risk category. So you might, when you start to get your care at the hospital with your care provider, they're thinking about building slowly a list of your potential risk factors so that they can categorize you to a particular pathway through the factory. And then your care providers are allocated to you based on that as well. So the world over, hospitals work like an industrial factory with rules, policies, staff, systems, and processes. The problem is that the systems and hospitals were solely and completely built philosophically by men because men instigated the medicalization of childbirth, mostly because women at the time that birth was being moved from home to hospital and medicalized so that it came under the medical gaze instead of the social and just normal well-being sort of stage of a woman, is that men were the only people who were able to be educated at that time. So just by way of that social structure, men designed maternity care and hospitals, and they designed it like a factory, as if our bodies were machines that just produced and expelled a baby. the thing is that when you apply a masculine gaze and process and thought to a feminine experience, is that they wrongly defined it. And then, so now what we're doing and what you're doing, what all of the people who are advocating for the pullback of medicalization over childbirth, we're trying to feminize it again. We're trying to say, actually, you guys, you got it a fair bit wrong. And now that we have more agency in the world as women, we can be educated, we can have professions. Now is our opportunity to reverse what happened, the masculinization of childbirth management and of maternity care, and actually say, hang on, we want now to define, we want to tell you what we need in childbirth. And it's not, for most women, it's not this factory model. So, yes, while it's different the world over, in some ways, it's very much the same in that global sense that birth is in hospital because it's medicalized. And when you medicalize something, you by default make it masculine and mechanical because that's the strength of the thinking of men is that they do think and create things differently to women. Thankfully, they've got a particular skill set. The problem is they wrongly applied it to the management of maternity care and birth. And so we are trying to reverse that. Yeah.
And they made it a for-profit service. So I'm not saying that all hospitals are for-profit. I definitely understand there are not-for-profit hospitals and some whole systems out there are not for profit. But at the end of the day, moving it from the home to the hospital system was partly about management and control, but largely due to money because they wanted to charge for this service and they saw an opportunity to charge families to then care for them in this space that was traditionally feminine, done at home, private, and spiritual. And almost all of those things have been removed in the hospital system.
And then this is where systems start to diverge in their sort of motivations. Here in Australia, our healthcare system is largely publicly funded. And so the argument of the cesarean sections are increasing and inductions are increasing so that doctors can make more money is not as relevant as in the US, where definitely certain interventions have been monetized and maybe doctors will capitalize on that for financial gain. So, having said that, our cesarean rates are very similar to US cesarean rates, even though cesareans and inductions are not largely monetized here in Australia. And so you have to ask, okay, are people being motivated by money or is it something else? And I would suggest potentially some people will capitalize on interventions for financial gain. But can it be said that's the whole reason for the problem? Probably not, because here in Australia, with a public model, we still have high cesarean section rates and high induction rates. Here, 43% of first-time mums are being induced, and our cesarean section rate is it's upwards to nearly 40% as well. So we have the same problems. I think early on in history, definitely the way that medical men started to get involved in birth is that they recognized that midwives were caring for women and that was their profession and they were being paid to do. And I do think that's fair that you're rendering a service, you get paid for that service. But then GPs, so general practitioners, started to set up their medical practices and realized that their long-term clients were going to be caring for families from the beginning of their lives all the way through. And so it was a wise business decision to start offering pregnancy, birth, and postnatal care because then that woman and her babies and her family would be they would be the family GP for the rest of their lives. So it was partially a business decision to commandeer as many a client base right from the beginning of life. And then things like tools started to be invented. So forceps, that's a whole story in itself where the forceps were designed by particular clinicians and they were patented. They kept them secret in a locked cupboard and they were the ones who used them. And over time, they became more universally used. But certainly, interventions initially became monetized. And yeah, so the initial takeover of birth was for financial reasons. It wasn't so much that so many women and so many babies were having catastrophic events that the public servants went, oh my gosh, something has to be done. That wasn't really the main motivation. It was this medicalization of childbirth so that it became the domain of medicine. Because if something isn't medicalized, you can't claim ownership over it. That's the process of medicalization. And they do it to so many things. Sexual dysfunction is being medicalized so that they can make medicine and so that they can offer solutions to these problems that quite possibly are social or relational. They're not physical, but when you convince the public that something is wrong, you can then offer them the solution. So, this is what's happened with childbirth, and they've very successfully convinced everybody that childbirth is so dangerous that it needs to be done at a hospital. So, actually, most people in the public now believe that because it's the authoritative message and they will defend that. No, childbirth is so dangerous. We have to go to hospital. And then people like you and I are the enemy. They're like, why would you speak out against hospitals? They're saving us. Hospital is so dangerous. So I guess I'm asking, just understanding the history helps us to understand that maybe that's not entirely true. And I can say that with a bit more certainty as well because I'm a home birth midwife myself. And for 17 years, I've been attending women giving birth at home. And I transfer about 10% of my clients. And that's not always because there's an emergency. Some of those are emergencies, some of those are for other reasons. So I can say with like from practical experience that most women do not need highly medicalized care because 90% of my clients haven't. So I'm like, it can't be true that 100% of women need to give birth in hospital. But also the academic research is also on the side of that idea. So it's not like you and I are making up that maybe we've over medicalized childbirth. We have, without a doubt, over medicalized childbirth. And now the research is showing what is the result of that. So when you over medicalize something, what happens? And that's probably the whole topic of every single episode of your podcast. It's certainly something that I talk about on the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. And that's an ongoing story, but yeah.
I just attended a nursing conference made for labor and delivery nurses, obstetric nurses, NICU nurses, postpartum nurses. Here in the U.S., it's called AWAN. And I first went a couple years ago, and I was really nervous because historically online, I've received a lot of pushback from people in the medical community because exactly what you said. Anytime that I speak out about the things that are harming women and they have very clearly been proven to be harmful to women, I get pushback from the medical community. And that wasn't my experience. I went and I was welcomed. They were warm. They loved doulas. I welcomed their ideas. I welcomed their experiences of working with doulas. And I wanted to know the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, the wonderful, the horrible. I wanted to know it all. And I got all of those stories. They shared very openly the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And this year, was the very first year that I heard multiple conversations of nurses saying that they had learned that they were actually harming their patients and they didn't know that before, and that they were feeling things, remorse, guilt, sadness, an eagerness, a yearning to learn better because now that they knew what they have always done is hurting people, no one has taught them what to do instead. And it just lit me up inside. And I felt very sad for them that they had been put in that predicament and they had been taught something that was harming women. But I also was really proud of them for being able to look in the mirror and say, okay, I did this and it's okay. I'm not a bad person and it doesn't make me a bad nurse and it doesn't make me an ill-intentioned caregiver. But now that I know better, I've got to do better. And how do I do that? Where do I seek that information? Where do I gain that knowledge? And then how do I implement that in my practice? How do I take it back to my unit and change my hospital? Who should I be contacting to change the policies in our hospital? And look, it just gave me chills right now. Like, it was just so inspiring for us to set the cloak aside, show up in a raw and vulnerable state, and have a true and honest, transparent conversation to say, we have all unintentionally hurt another human in our life. That is part of the human experience, is to harm someone that you never intended to harm, whether it be a patient that you're caring for, or a friend that you said something, or your partner that you did something and you didn't necessarily mean it that way. But then to realize, all right, I have a choice here. I'm at a crossroads. I can either keep doing what I've been doing because it's comfortable and that's how we do it and that's what I was taught and that's what the policy says, or I can choose to be a little bit of a rebel and I can say, I'm not going to keep doing that. And I'm not going to keep harming people. And I am going to change what I'm doing and I'm going to learn better. And for me, it was just like, oh my God, it was such a just good breath of air. And I was like, these are my people. Yes, I have found them. I love it.
You bring up so many points in there because the professionalization and I guess education of maternity staff now, it embodies that medicalization. And part of that idea is that they genuinely believe they're doing the right and safest thing for women.
I do.
They do, right? So they enter into the hospital and they think this is what is right. This is what I've been trained. This is what I've been told is right. This is what's safe. We all fundamentally believe it until you get information that makes you question that messaging, which is what the midwives and nurses who you were exposed to at the conference were experiencing. And you can't see it. It Marsden Wagner, who was the World Health Organization lead over the maternity care stuff, he wrote an article and he's talk about how a fish can't see water. They're in it. They don't realize what's going on around them. You don't realize you're in water until you're out of it, or if you're having an outsider view of it. When you're in it, you're so accidentally indoctrinated into that messaging that you can't fully see it. But then midwives and nurses and maternity care workers, they start to wake up and realize and look into it just a little bit. And the distress or the upset that they're feeling, there's a word for it. It's starting to be more and more researched. Maternity care workers are increasingly experiencing what we call moral distress, where they know that what they're doing is not right or best, but there's this pull because they're contractually obliged to do those things in their workplace. But the moral distress comes is because they feel like it's not right for the woman. And so they're torn between properly serving the woman and properly serving their workplace. And moral distress is considered one of the main reasons that maternity care workers burn out, is that they can no longer tolerate the emotional impact that it has on them, to know that they have to go to work every day and that they're not doing the best they know they can do, but that's what their workplace requires them to do. And so for a long time, I thought maybe we could change the system fast enough. Maybe in our lifetime, we would see this utopia maternity care system that we're like, finally, it properly serves the needs of women. I actually don't think in my lifetime that we'll see it, because there's so many people invested in this message that birth is dangerous and we have to go to hospital, and it has to be, if it's in hospital, it has to be systematized and industrialized like this. So my strategy, I think, it's let's assume that the maternity care system represents this huge burning forest fire. And one or two really invested people are trying to put the fire out with buckets. We can make a little difference in our little patch, maybe with the place you work at, the women around you. But how do we put the whole thing out? And we can't rely on the people in the system to mobilize and change the system. They're the wrong people. They're not going to be it. So I think the focus should be on informing and preparing women, because if you imagine every woman to have a fire hose, and they are all willing to receive the messages because they're not invested in this maternity care system necessarily. What they want is a great birth. They want to be kept safe themselves. They want their baby to be safe, and they want to come out healthy, happy, without being damaged, traumatized, having inadvertent things happen to them. And so, if you arm each woman with a hose, all of a sudden you've changed the entire scenario. We don't have to change the system. We actually have to just educate women, and they are powerful enough and capable enough of mobilizing themselves to make sure that the system changes to suit their purposes. Me personally, if I think about my lifelong crusade, it's no longer to try and convince hospital staff that they need to do something differently, because there's a whole, even if you convince that one staff member, there's so many barriers for them. There's hospital policy, there's the workplace culture, there's expectation from their registration and from their workplace staff. Whereas if you've got an empowered woman who walks in and says, right, here's how it's going to be, then she's walking into a forest fire with a hose. So I think that's where we're going to see systematic change, is the more women understand, the better equipped they are. And then the system has to change, because they're theoretically there to serve women. So if women keep telling them, here's how I want to be served, they will gradually start offering that service. Yeah.
The gradual part really kills me. What you just described is what I teach as demand better. And so I tell women that if you go in and you just demand better care, then the system will either rise or they will hand you off to somebody else. They'll say, I can't serve you. I don't let my patients go to 40 weeks and beyond. And you can say, great, then it doesn't look like you're skilled enough to support me in birth. I would like to have a better skilled OBGYN, or I'd like to be handed off to midwives who are trained in going post date. So I call that demand better. You just have to, and we're not doing it in a confrontational way. It's just I don't feel comfortable with 39-week induction, and I do feel comfortable going past my due date to wait for spontaneous labor. How can we achieve this together? And you give that provider an opportunity to say, okay, I trust you. Here are my preferences. I'd like for you to come in for these tests. I'd like to monitor this much. That's my preference, and you can either accept or decline that, or they will be honest with you and say, I don't think we can achieve that. And that's really good for you to know up front that that provider is not a good fit for you. And in the US, we have so many healthcare deserts, unfortunately, that it's not always possible to change providers. Like in the state of Mississippi, more than 50% of the state is a healthcare desert. And that's so unfortunate because you may be with someone who's totally misaligned with you and totally just not respecting your autonomy, not consensual, not respecting your preferences, totally not hearing you, and you really don't have another option. And that sucks. And that puts women in a really hard place because then you have no choice but to advocate for yourself. You have no
Yes.
choice but to get educated, and the possibility that confrontation and the intensity of your birth space increases
Mhm.
is really likely, which sucks because that's not anything any woman deserves. We all deserve a really grounded, calm, sanctuary, secure, safe, loving, nurturing, comfortable space to birth. And when you live in a healthcare desert, it's hard to find that sometimes.
Yeah, we have a similar situation in Australia. We have such a huge land mass and not really all that many people. It's something like 28 million. people over this huge landmass. So we have these rural settings way out where often there's not even a midwife or an obstetrician. They're being cared for by a GP, like a general practitioner, and there's one health service, there's one hospital, and everybody knows the staff because that's you've got one option. And yes, advocacy, you have to be so robust though, because one option is to change care providers. But if that's not an option, then your other option is that you have to fight and advocate for yourself. And that shows the power struggle, the inherent power struggle that exists within this medicalized factory industrialized system. Is that not only have they dictated how you're going to be cared for, but they view their knowledge and their decisions as superior and authoritative over women. And so when women say, why is it so hard to say no to something? Why am I struggling to navigate this? That's because there's an inherent power imbalance. This person, it's like trying to advocate for yourself with the police or with a parent as a child. They're an authority figure. They've positioned themselves an authority figure and they expect compliance. And so when they don't get it, then there's these coercive strategies that start to come out, and women get confused. They don't understand. It's my body. Why are you fighting this? Why don't I have a choice? The reason you don't have a choice is they believe that they have a superior position over you and that they know what's best for you and that you don't. And so that ability to advocate for yourself, it's almost like you're starting on the back foot. You have to make up ground before there's even an even playing field for you to have a say. And ways that you can counteract that struggle, that power struggle, was firstly to know that there is a power struggle. Most women don't realize that. So the fact that you know now, oh, hang on, they think they're superior to me. Okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. You've got to arm yourself with strategies that give you more power. And that would be things like a doula. You've got to gather a team. You need a crew. It's like going to war with an army. I know I'm being dramatic, but the more people
It's
you
not so
have,
dramatic, though. It's the thing. It's like, this is the reality.
yes. So you need a team to rally with you that you're all for the same purpose. You're like, you guys are here to make sure that I don't have to compromise on what I want. But when you're in labor, you're vulnerable. So you aren't, if you consider yourself not armed when you're in labor, you don't have the capacity to fight like you usually do because you're busy. Your brain is busy, your body is busy laboring and trying to have a baby. So then you need to rely on the people around you to make sure that there's no compromise on the things you absolutely want, but also to help with decision making. If things change and all of a sudden your needs become more complex and you weren't planning a cesarean section, but it becomes really obvious that one is probably the best option, you need people there who can think strategically about this and go, okay, what questions do we need to ask? How do we advocate for the best possible cesarean? Can we have more time? Is there another option? These are not things that women really can do to full capacity or should have to do when you're in labor. And so having a robust team, I call it the robust team, is you build it and you prepare your team for what you need. And some women say, I can't afford a doula. I said, that's okay. You've got to equip your partner then. Oh, my partner couldn't do that. They're not really that type of person. Okay, that's a great thing to know. Do you have a robust friend, a mom who would go in and just mama bear the heck out of that situation, or like a great friend, somebody who could fill that role? And it's okay if your partner's not set for that role either. But if you don't realize it, and then you have these high expectations on them for birth and they don't fulfill them, there's a whole new issue that develops because after the birth, you feel abandoned, like they didn't protect you, like they weren't on your side. And that opens up a whole new issue. Whereas if from the beginning you're like, okay, that's okay. Either you need to be prepared to become the person that I need, or we need to acknowledge that you're not that person. Obviously, they'll still be at the birth, they still have a role, but we don't look to them for the advocacy part. We bring in somebody else. So there's ways around this. There's lots of things we can't control, and one of those might be who cares for you, but you can control who you bring with you. You can control how informed you are before you go in. So listening to podcasts, reading books, like finding the resources, talking to other women, getting as informed as you possibly can, so that when you're presented with decisions, you don't have to firstly rely on your care provider to give you all the information, because they're only going to give you the information that they want you to have so that you make the decision they want you to make. And you don't realize you have options until you've investigated that topic fully. If somebody says, oh, we need to give you induction, you're like, hang on a second, I've heard about this before. There are other options. I could have extra monitoring. I could, whatever the other options are. So women have a responsibility in the background to gather towards them a team, and also to gather information. If you can't control where you're going to give birth or who is going to be your care provider, control those other elements, because it still gives you power in that power struggle.
Yeah. I do hate to talk about it like that, but it is so true. It really is a power dynamic, and that's by design. So I think that women should realize, like, and we've mentioned it, but your providers don't wake up in the morning and they're like, who can I take advantage of today? It's like the system has built them to be this type of provider. Med school started in their freshman year to mold them to be this type of provider. The pay that they get, the incentives, the bonuses, the schedules, the lack of staff, it all goes into molding the system into what it is today. And that involves us going through it as patients. And it's unfortunate that is what it is, but it is what it is. All right, let me get real with you for a second when it comes to postpartum. I know postpartum is daunting and it probably feels like it's going to be a roller coaster, but if there's one thing that you deserve right now, it's comfort that doesn't compromise. And that's exactly why I am obsessed with Cozy Earth. Their bamboo pajamas, I talk about them all the time because they're buttery soft, breathable, and temperature regulating. So that's perfect for postpartum. Whether you're sweating through those night feeds or you're curled up for that sacred 20-minute nap, you are wrapped in luxury. And my favorite bonus, they're stretchy enough to be nursing friendly but cute enough so you won't feel like you've totally lost yourself in the yoga pant life. I have 4 pair of their PJs, 2 of their lounge sets, and their socks, both the ankle socks and the wool socks for these frigid Boston winters. And let's talk about their bedding. Cozy Earth sheets are like sleeping on a cloud made of cool silk, also temperature regulating. Just like the PJs, they are buttery soft, sustainably crafted, and I have found that they actually get softer with every wash. What more could you want? I swear, climbing into bed feels like a spa moment, and postpartum, you deserve that. If you're healing, leaking, nursing, or just trying to survive, surround yourself in something that makes you feel held and comforted. Cozy Earth is my go-to gift for every new mom friend, because when you're up all night, your sheets matter. You can try them risk-free for 100 nights with their sleep trial, and they come with a 10-year warranty. When you are well rested, you can show up more present and joyful for your family and your new baby. Prioritize yourself and your sleep in postpartum so that you can truly enjoy your transition to motherhood. Use my code Hehe, Hehe, for 40% off. Yes, a whopping 40% off your order at CozyEarth.com. That's right, nearly half off of the coziest investment that you'll ever make for your sleep, your sanity, and your self-care. Visit CozyEarth.com and use code Hehe. Visit CozyEarth.com and use my code Hehe, because your 4th trimester should be soft, breathable, and guilt-free luxurious. Okay, I have a question about the C-section rate in Australia. We're fond here in America of thinking that it is a financially incentivized thing, and that if we would remove the incentives financially, that we might see our C-section rate go down. If that's not the system that you have, how come you think you have a high C-section rate that sounds like exceeding what the U.S. has, and it sounds like it's rising?
Yes, so it's rising at least 1% a year for us. And again, obviously, it's different for first time mums versus mums who have had babies before. So fundamentally, there's so many reasons for why the cesarean section rate is increasing. But firstly, again, we go back to the fact that we've medicalized childbirth. So when you care for childbirth and women in a medical way, you're not thinking of enhancing the physiology of birth. And so more often, the physiology doesn't work. And so then we are creating these scenarios where women's bodies don't work the way they were supposed to work. And now we need to intervene in that because now we've got a problem. So part of it is what we call the cascade of intervention, that when you medically manage something, you perpetuate the opportunities for things to go wrong because every intervention has both an intended and unintended circumstance. And so you need to intervene to counteract the unintended result of your interventions. So that's one thing, is that a highly interventive or medicalized approach to birth generates more medicalized circumstances. Therefore, you need more cesarean sections because it goes wrong more often. That's a generalized way of seeing it. But now we have this snowball situation where we're also not supporting women to have vaginal birth after cesarean section. So then when you historically have a 30% or 35% cesarean section rate, and those women are coming back for their next babies, if you've got a low percentage of vaginal birth after cesarean section, and here it's about 12% of women, if you go to hospital, will have a vaginal birth after cesarean section. You can flip that. It's like in the high 80s and 90s if you have a home birth for VBAC. But again, not many women are doing that here in Australia. It's less than 1%. And that's, often around the world. So, firstly, we've gradually perpetuated these high cesarean section rates through medicalization and also reluctance to wait for the labor process to unfold. So, we're intervening too early. So, if labor's taking a long time and then they get augmented with oxytocin, and then that doesn't quite go, the baby gets upset or whatever happens, and okay, here we go, now we're off for cesarean section. So, we haven't waited. We also haven't provided facilities that allow for easy movement and comfort in labor, which is a massive reason why babies maybe are malpositioned and then they can't come out because there's a labor dystocia going on or obstruction because the woman wasn't comfortable, or here we go, we've got epidurals now. So again, the more we intervene, the more you have to intervene to get a well and healthy baby. And so now it's like, how do we stop it? How do we stop? Already, you're going to perpetuate approximately a 30% cesarean section rate simply because those women are coming back for their second babies and they had a cesarean the first time. So I think it's just getting out of hand. And this is where people are starting to rein it in and go, whoa, hang on a second. What's happened? It's slowly been creeping up on us. And as the numbers start creeping into the 30% cesarean section rates, and soon they'll be creeping into the 40s. And now we're asking, like, how can we reverse that? So the answer is vaginal birth after cesarean section needs to be supported and so encouraged. And even now, vaginal birth after multiple cesareans needs to be encouraged because this is where we're up to now. Women are having second, third, fourth babies, and their first one might have been a cesarean section. We need to vaginalize breech birth again because that
Yes.
also contributes to cesarean sections. And then if you had a breech cesarean, then your next birth is more likely to be a cesarean section. And twins, it's just these things just build up and build up and build up. And then here you go, you've got these high cesarean section rates, and we're like, oh, how do we reduce it? Oh, you gotta. The other way is what we know is if midwives are in charge of woman, like of organizing a woman's care, you can reduce cesarean section rates. So we put birth is in the hands of medical people, of doctors, and then we start asking questions of like, why are we all having cesarean sections? This is what happens when you let doctors look after a physiological experience that a woman is having. And this was all built by men, the whole structure. And they're like, why isn't it working? Why aren't the babies coming out? You're like, you haven't done it right. This is mostly not our fault. And the World Health Organization talks about cesarean section rate between 10 and 15% seems to be the tipping point by which we can save babies that might have needed cesarean section that would otherwise not have survived. So there is an agreement, and I agree that there's a percentage of women who must have a cesarean section if they want a live baby. Around the world, that's not always possible. I know midwives who are working in remote communities and communities that are not well resourced with medicine, and they will say we would sooner have a dead baby than give a woman a cesarean section because a cesarean section puts the woman at risk to get a live baby. But that baby is not going to survive if its parent doesn't. They can always have another baby. You can't make another mother. So that's the really hard situation in low resourced countries. Here in Australia and the US, we can say, look, we are capable of doing safe surgery where both the mum and the baby have a really high chance of surviving. There's no doubt we need intervention. I think what you and I are arguing is that we've over intervened in birth and now there's problems because of it. But no one is willing to admit that maybe the way we're doing it isn't working the way we thought it was going to work. So can we just want to pull it back a little bit? It's not like we don't want access to medical care. We're not saying that we can do without this. We want access to medical care when we need it, and then we don't want medical care when we don't need it. But the problem is that the maternity care system says all of you need it. All of you need this, and that's not true.
I think you just hit on so many good points. It's really hard to have an low intervention birth in a medicalized system that is incentivized, whether it be financially or by the system itself, to intervene, right? That just feels so impossible. Another thing that I think is really hard for both providers and consumers is the lag in data. So we know that our research is about 17 years behind practice. And so once we find out that something is not working and or is working, it takes nearly 2 decades to actually get that into overall generalized standard practice, which is really hard. However, something I find very fishy is that the Arrive trial got pushed out in a year or two.
This is it.
I just find it so fishy that if it is beneficial to the system or we can start to put people more on that timeline, on that conveyor belt, we can get that information out really easily and we can disseminate that education across the whole world. But if it is more, oh, induction might actually increase the risk of shoulder dystocia, oh, that's going to take 20 years to get into practice. So what the hell is up with that?
Yes. So this is confirmation bias. So if a piece of research matches what you already believe and what you're already doing, you will more readily accept it than if it is against what you are already doing and already believe. And so people talk about hospitals actually operating based on culture and not on evidence. So if the whole hospital is, let's talk about the term breech trial was the same. People were doing breech births by cesarean, but also vaginally. And when the term breech trial came out, which has now been well and truly debunked as really poor research method, it came out and almost overnight they said, we're not doing vaginal breech anymore. All the breeches are going to be born by cesarean. But that was already what they wanted. They wanted women to have cesarean sections for breech because vaginal breech birth was it's a bit different to head down birth. Maybe they weren't so confident. Maybe their facility didn't support it. You were swimming a little bit upstream anyway if you were a practitioner supporting vaginal breech birth. And so then when the term breech trial came out, there was a really easy exit strategy from what they were still being pulled to do vaginal breech births because there wasn't what they would think conclusive information to say that they should do otherwise. And then when the term breech trial gave them an opportunity, they snapped it up. Same with induction. The culture of the maternity care system is that we want to control as much of your pregnancy and birth as we possibly can. And part of that is elective induction at a time that they decide, or elective cesarean section, or putting time limits on your physiological labor, putting time limits and rules around your VBAC. So there's all of these rules and expectations on labor and birth because when you're running a factory in an institution, you need to control as many factors as you can for efficient function. You can't have women laboring in hospital for 24 hours. It throws out the whole system. We're not resourced, we're not staffed for that. Doesn't fit into their expectations of labor. And so whenever something presents itself as an opportunity to keep doing that, you cling to it, you promote it, you love it. To be honest, I do the same thing. If a paper comes out and is see, this, I'm out there promoting it the next minute. But the minute a paper comes out that is against what I think, I'm reading line by line, working out what I can do to dispel this paper. We all do it, but we have to recognize that. And I'm like, oh, okay. I have to consciously scrutinize everything because my confirmation bias is going to motivate me to cling to research that supports what I already believe. So that's just the same thing that's happening in maternity care, but on a huge scale, and it impacts a lot of people. And so we need to work out how can we put aside our personal biases and read something for what it is rather than what we want it to say. And that's what happened with the term breach trial. It's what happened with the arrive trial. Actually, if you look deeper into them, as I did because they went against my confirmation bias, then you would see actually the research methodology is really poor, that the conclusion didn't match the actual study. But the people who really love the idea that we could induce women at 39 weeks or do breech by cesarean section, they read the first little bit, the first little abstract, and the two-line conclusion, and they ran with it without scrutinizing the research. And the scrutiny comes after, but then the damage is already done because they're so quick to change or support their position. And then they say to women, oh, this study came out, and here's why we do 39-week inductions. And then the women are ill equipped to read these research papers and they trust that the doctor has looked at it. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they're just repeating what they heard a colleague say. Part of my work on the Great Birth Rebellion podcast is to try and demystify those research papers and to say to women, okay, your physician, your care provider might present you with this paper to encourage you to induction. Okay, if you want one, completely fine. Go with it. If you don't, if you want to see what type of research they're using to inform their practice and to try and encourage you to have an induction, perhaps you might want to consider looking into this research paper yourself. And I guess my role I see is bringing women on the journey from trying to bringing the research to them in a bit more of a palatable way than how it's written, because they're written in just academic gobbledygook. It's very complicated to decipher a research paper if you're not already familiar with how they write them. And my PhD really equipped me to be able to go, oh, I see what they've done here. I see what they're trying to do with the conclusion here. And most people wouldn't see it, but I can because I understand how research is done and the words that are used. So Yeah, that's the reason why some things are picked up and some things aren't, is that the system has become largely culturally inspired. And so basically what they've always done is what they want to continue to do. Any research that supports that, they'll bring that on board, and any research that doesn't, they'll just conveniently leave aside.
That is so frustrating and annoying. I am one of the nerds that loves research, and I too like to go deep into the articles. And I think a lot of people can feel overwhelmed with research and it feels very daunting. And I do think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how to read scientific papers. I have a master's degree, and so whether I wanted to or not, there were plenty of classes that I was forced to learn these skills. And at the
Yeah.
time, I obviously was very annoyed and I was like, when am I ever going to use this? And now I use it every day. And I do feel very blessed. And I'm just really lucky that I did have exposure to that. And I was able to get a master's degree that equipped me with the skills to be able to decipher these people. And then take it and regurgitate it to the general public in a way that they understand and to be able to answer questions about it that unfortunately I think a lot of providers aren't able to answer those questions, or they'll just pull something out of thin air and it's not right. It's not the right thing. And so I'm able to direct people back to the paper and say, it's funny to hear your provider say this because in the paper, the researchers actually state this and this, which contradicts what your provider said. Maybe ask your provider about that next time. And most of the time, you find your provider say, oh, I haven't even read the paper. And it's, you're making decisions about my birth, my body, my baby, a pivotal experience in my life, and you have not even read the paper. And that can, I think, feel very just manipulative to a lot of people. I think a lot of people feel as if their trust has been eroded a little bit when they reach these scenarios with their providers. And so I think conversations like this one has been just super helpful for a lot of people in being able to navigate that system. Okay, I want to wrap up with a final question because it's something that you and I both talk about a lot, and this baby is like kicking like crazy. So I think they are just like loving this conversation. This is so crazy. My final question for you is talking about the responsibility that women have in their birth. I think that a lot of times women can feel as if they don't have a lot of control. And my doctor said I can't do this, or that's just what the hospital policy says. So I'm not sure I'm allowed to do that. And you and I both are big fans of hospital policy is not the law. It's not written for you. It's written for hospital staff to abide by. And you are a grown woman. You are capable. You are smart. You are informed. And you have control over the decisions that are made in your labor. Elaborate a little bit about that and just tell our listeners what they need to know about being consumers going through the healthcare system when they encounter things like, I don't allow my patients, or the policy says that you can't, or you can't make this decision, when in fact, you absolutely can.
Mm. Well, that's right. The policies aren't written for you, they're written for the care providers. So, again, it's if we consider the factory analogy, they're the factory workers, and there's rules to their employment. There's rules to how they manage the conveyor belt. But there's no rules that are applied to you as a woman. What you're responsible for, though, is being informed and educated enough that you feel confident and capable of making a decision that's not in line with policy and feel that it is the right decision. And that's what you definitely want to do. Because if you don't know that you have other options, then you don't have other options because you don't know what else to ask for, or the simplest things like a vaginal examination. It might be the same in the US, but here in Australia, it's generally every 4 hours you'll be offered a vaginal examination, sometimes every 2 hours, depending on your scenario. And if you don't know that you can say no to that, then you will accept a 4 hourly vaginal examination, whether you wanted it, needed it, enjoyed it, or not. Sometimes you're like, I hated that part. And when you say, do you realize that you could have said no? They said, no, I thought I had to have it. No, the policy is just one option. The array of options is more vast, but if your care provider has operated under the policy for so long that they've de-skilled in being able to provide a range of options, then it presents just another issue that, say, for example, your baby's breech, and you say, I know I can have a breech vaginal birth. And they say the policy here is cesarean section for breech. But you've done your research and you're like, I know I could have a vaginal breech birth. However, the main thing that's going to keep me safe is a skilled clinician, because the more dangerous thing about vaginal breech birth is someone who doesn't know what they're doing and they're frightened and they start doing things that actually cause a problem. So you might also know that too. And you might say, do you know what? In this scenario, with the range of choices that I have, with the limitations that are presented to me, I may actually choose a cesarean section. And I'm not choosing it because someone pressured me into that or because the care provider, that's the policy. I'm choosing it because I understand all the elements that have gone into this, and I feel like I don't have a safer option. And that could make you feel more empowered than just going along with it. Oh, that's the policy, I had to. But if you understand all the pieces behind it, maybe you realize that maybe this isn't an okay decision to make in this scenario. Or you might say, I have got 4 other options for obstetricians, and I have done my legwork, and I know that one of them is more supportive of vaginal breech birth than the others. Maybe I could take responsibility, go try and find that person, access their care, and fight to the end for my vaginal breech birth. So I think information doesn't necessarily get you the exact scenario that you want, but it can make you feel okay with what unfolds because you've managed to put all the pieces together and you made that decision. And that's what I encourage women about. I talk about trying to have a great birth. And people are like, oh, this happened, it wasn't great. I'm like, but how did you feel? Yeah, I've had clients who were planning a home birth who ended up with a cesarean and were so happy, except how could you be happy? You didn't get anything that you originally planned. And that's because they made the choices. They were given the time, they had the information, they had care providers who loved and respected them. And at the end, they felt that cesarean was absolutely necessary. And so they accepted it willingly and they feel good about it. So, yes, they didn't have a vaginal birth, but it was still a great birth because they've come out better. They haven't come out worse than they were. I don't remember your original question because I've just gone way off track. But I feel like, yeah, I think, oh, the responsibility. So women taking responsibility. I think people say, oh, that's not fair. Women shouldn't have to. I'm like, no, they really should not have to. They should have a system that honors them as the boss of their birth and who gives them what they need and who is evidence based and is individualized and who gives them access to midwifery care and doesn't over medicalize the process. The problem is we've got a system that is not on your side. And so now you have to advocate for yourself if you want something better than what's on offer. So although it'd be great if women didn't have to take responsibility, that was just like a great birth was handed to us. But I think that in this climate, if you want to have a great experience, you have to invest time, money, thought, like in the same way as you would invest in a wedding, buying a car, like the amount of research and thought and planning that goes into them. I think we have to do that for our births just by way of how things currently are. You have to plan it. Or you will just go with the flow, accept whatever is on offer, and then receive the outcomes that everybody else is getting. High cesarean section rates, high induction rates, high intervention births, and you'll maybe at the end think, oh, that could have probably been better if
Mm.
only I knew. But yeah, so if you know, you've got options. And yeah, we're responsible for our own knowledge and planning.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I love that you bring up the risk, right? I love that you say you're allowed to make decisions that aren't your ideal because you understand the risk. And it's something that I talk about a lot. My crowd is very used to me. I call it radical responsibility because I always talk about every choice has risk and benefits. Every single one. You're never going to get a riskless option. So if you are choosing an option and it may be different than what your care provider is suggesting to you, you just have to be okay with those risks. You have to be okay with the outcome. But the opposite of that is that you're not okay with the choice and you're not okay with the risk, and you still choose that to be a good patient. And that's how we get birth trauma, is because you felt forced into something, you weren't really okay with it, and that bad thing, that risk really did play out in your story, and you wished you had chosen something different, even though it also came with risk. You
Mhm.
preferred that risk over this risk. And so I think a lot of times when people are thinking about responsibility, the risk can sometimes fall to the wayside and we don't always consider it. And we have to consider, if this risk happens, will you be okay with it? And that is actually a large part of that radical responsibility and making decisions for yourself. And again, no choice comes without risk. It's just which risk feel better to you, which risk feel almost less risky to you, which outcome would you feel better with if they were to happen. Oh my gosh, Mel, I cannot even thank you enough for this conversation. This was so good. And my listeners know and as well, I don't come with any preconceived notions or pre-written questions. I just let the conversation take us where it needs to take us, because I believe that each guest is going to bring what they need to bring, that my audience needs to hear, and the people that show up to hear that particular episode will be the ones that need to hear that message. And I really am so grateful for you coming on and sharing this. I think you have an incredibly eloquent way of sharing the system that ultimately is not designed for us. It is designed for control over labor, and it is designed for profit, and it is designed to put women down this conveyor belt. And ultimately, those things do interfere with birth, but it doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to mean that you are out of control or that you are doomed to get a birth that you don't want. You have so much control. And I really thank you for being here and sharing all of this wisdom with us. So, where can people connect with you, learn from you? You have a program that people can join. Tell us all about that.
Okay, all about the things. So, yes, there's lots of ways you can find me. My website is melaниethemidwife.com. So, that's one place. And social media as Melanie the Midwife, particularly probably Instagram is the one that I post most often. TikTok's humming away back there. I do also have a YouTube channel, Melanie the Midwife. It's all very easy to find. And on there's also video versions of my podcast. So the podcast is the thing that is currently not only taking up most of my time, but probably my sole real focus at the moment, the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. And we get about, what is it? I check every week because I'm excited. About 50,000 downloads a week on
Nice.
the podcast. Yeah, so it's getting really big, which is great because it means I'm just really motivated to keep going with it. So the Great Birth Rebellion podcast is where I put out weekly content. But something that I felt was lacking with that platform is that you can't tell a really deep, cohesive story,
Mhm.
almost similar to the what we hinted about a lot of it in this episode. And for that reason, I built this online, oh, it's a course. I called it the Guide to a Great Birth. And it goes deeper into all of this stuff that we were talking about. Understanding the system, how to navigate it, how to work around it, how to become informed, what's your role, what's the role of your care provider, your partner, your support team, It's where I've put the rest of the information that I'm yet to be able to cohesively collect on the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. It's in a bit of a cohesive pattern in the Guide to a Great Birth. And partly what motivated it is I feel like there's lots of courses out there which give women some breathing techniques and positioning and affirmations, and they're great. They're definitely pain management tools. They are labor management tools, but they're not great birth planning tools. All they are is helping you to get through labor. But what happens if you're in a facility that doesn't match you, your care provider doesn't match you, your team has abandoned you, and you're not informed enough to know that you have options? No amount of meditating or breathing or upright positioning is going to create enough change in your scenario to make you feel like that was so great. Like, great birth can be great. We're actually hormonally wired to feel bliss and feel great and be positively transformed by birth. So, the Great Birth Guide is all of the pre work that is done before you're in the labor space that will ultimately impact on the outcome of your birth. And yes, of course, like some advice on breathing and pain management and position. It's in there because I'm a midwife and I don't want to leave that out. Women want that. But the crux of it is this understanding what you're going into, how to be informed, and how to take your place as the boss of your birth. So that's where I'm currently pouring my energy, as well as the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. And I feel like they go really well hand in hand, Guide to a Great Birth and the Great Birth Rebellion. On top of that, I'm still a clinical midwife, so I'm still doing home births and working with my colleagues. And the other thing, which maybe some of your listeners might want to come to, but in August, I'm running the second Convergence of Rebellious Midwives. So that is a conference that I started last year, the Convergence. And actually, Stu Fishbein was one of the keynote speakers last year. And we've got Ina May Gaskin is speaking at this year.
Wow.
I know, it's epic. That's happening. And obviously birth workers, midwives, women, anyone is welcome to the Convergence. It's really lush. So that's another part of my work. But yeah, I would just encourage people to engage with one of those things. If you're going to take responsibility over something, I feel like I am in the business of information giving. And so that's what women can expect and people can expect to receive.
I love that. Oh my gosh, Mel, you have a way of speaking to my heart. We just are cut from the same cloth, and it was really such a joy to have you on the show. So thank you so much for joining me. And listeners, I hope that this is the episode that you needed to find that inner voice, to find that confidence, to know that not only do you deserve good care in pregnancy and birth and postpartum, but that you're worthy of speaking up. You're worthy of using your voice. You deserve to speak up for yourself. You deserve to put together that team that Mel was talking about that will really love you and care for you in a compassionate way that is going to give you the best birth that you can possibly have. As always, you guys, thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow me on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by Hehe and at the.birth.lounge. Give Mel a follow as well. She's one of my favorite content creators on social media. I find myself seeking out her content because it is just so amazing. And until next time, you can head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and at data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm Hehe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.